Stop trying to light tomorrow's lamps tonight, Zen sleep. Right now, a cold, tight band of constriction is wrapping completely around the front of your throat, pulling down into the very base of your neck and forcing your breathing to move in a shallow, highly guarded pattern. It feels as though your body has become an engine designed to hoard fuel for a catastrophic midnight emergency, frantically checking the fluid levels of your emotional energy, over-trimming the unlit cotton wicks of your thoughts, and building imaginary defensive shields against a sudden darkness that has not even begun to fall. You are resting in a room where the crisp smell of rain-dampened soil breathes softly through the slight gap in the window frame, and the low, rhythmic patter of water droplets striking broad leaves outside creates a steady, cool backdrop. A small, dark, metallic object on your dresser catches the dim light, its heavy, unmoving form reflecting a total absence of friction, completely separated from the frantic heat of the waking day. Your throat and neck carry a defensive alertness, a subtle physical armor that acts as if you are responsible for providing the light for an entire province, even though the room around you is perfectly safe, dark, and still. Maybe you came to this space tonight because you are utterly exhausted by the endless labor of anticipating what could go wrong. Perhaps you have noticed that even when your life enters a period of relative calm, an internal guardian refuses to let the fire go out, forcing you to lie awake planning for future shortages, calculating risks, and hoarding solutions for crises that have not yet appeared on the horizon. You check your internal resources over and over, terrified that you will be caught empty-handed, stranded in the dark, without enough emotional fuel to survive the winter. You replay the schedules of the coming week, stack your tasks like wood for an unpredicted storm, and wonder why the center of your chest feels like dense, packed stone when the daylight fades. Dear friend, right now, let the weight of that vigilance rest. What you are experiencing in the tightness of your neck is not a failure of your spiritual practice, and you are not broken because your mind refuses to stop calculating the future. You are not failing because you feel an anxious clenching when you look toward the unknown. Tonight we will not force the mind to be silent, nor will we wage a war against the thoughts that are running so frantically across the landscape of your tomorrow. The mind sways out of a profound desire to keep you safe, but its chronic preparation has become a second weight that you were never meant to carry. The deep paradox of the overthinking heart is that your frantic preparation for darkness is the very thing that prevents you from experiencing the light. In the quiet lineage of Zen wisdom, we discover a surprising truth. The peace you seek is not a scarce fuel that you must hoard through chronic worry, but an inherent, luminous quality of your own awareness that naturally reveals itself the moment you stop trying to engineer tomorrow's safety. The light of your true being does not need to be manufactured by your intellect, nor does it require you to spend your nights stockpiling defenses against the dark. The suffering you feel tonight is not caused by the uncertainty of the future. It is caused by the heavy, exhausting friction of trying to light tomorrow's lamps with the limited energy of tonight. If it feels right, take a slow breath, letting the cool, rain-dampened air move past the tight band of your throat, and notice how the mattress beneath you completely absorbs the weight of your shoulders without requiring you to maintain any defensive alignment. Nothing is required of you now. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. The world outside your window is carrying its own weight. The rain is tending to the soil without your advice, and you are fully permitted to step off the treadmill of anticipation. You are safe enough to soften the rigid guard that has been patrolling the borders of your peace. Maybe you have felt this too, this strange, modern guilt that whispers you are falling behind or leaving yourself vulnerable if you are not actively scanning the horizon for the next emergency. We treat our minds like an unprotected flame in a gale, building massive walls, checking the perimeter, and pouring more and more oil into the vessel until the wick is completely drowned in our own anxiety. We become so busy preparing for the winter that we forget how to inhabit the sanctuary of the present hour. But the spirit cannot find its true equilibrium through permanent mobilization. There is an ancient, unlit abundance within you, a wide, cool bronze reservoir that knows exactly how to sit in the dark without generating any heat, any noise, or any fear. As you lie here, allow the dry, tight tension behind your jaw and along your collarbones to mimic the stillness of that heavy bronze. Even if the thoughts continue to circle like wind in the outer garden, you do not have to give them your body's strength. You can let the mind rehearse its emergencies, while the physical form drops completely into the gravity of the earth. You do not need to spark a single flame to be whole tonight, and you do not need to guarantee the safety of next year to deserve an hour of deep, undisturbed rest. The light you are so afraid of losing is built into the very fabric of your awareness, an unshakable presence that has never left your side. Even when the shadows seem long, allow the air to move naturally through your chest, noticing how the cool texture of the garden rain soothes the delicate linings of your throat, and let the small, strained nerves at the base of your skull give up their long day of tracking. You are letting go of the match. You are letting go of the fuel tank. You are letting the long line of your worries drop into the deep, dark well of the night. In the profound silence that is growing between the raindrops outside, we are going to travel to a quiet monastery courtyard where an old lamp keeper and a wide, plum-colored bronze vessel will show us the profound courage it takes to let the wick stay dry, and how the mind finally learns to trust the sanctuary of the unlit night. Deep within the stone-walled valleys where the mountain rain pooled in silent slate troughs, the low roofs of the temple garden sheltered a lifetime of quiet routine. The air within this enclosed courtyard was thick with the scent of wet granite, bruised cedar leaves, and the cold mineral clarity of a persistent summer downpour. Within this hidden sanctuary lived a young monk named Kazuki, whose primary duty was the care and provisioning of the monastery's night lamps. Kazuki was a diligent soul, yet his inner life was tormented by a severe internal contraction that lived constantly in the muscles of his throat. He had been told that in 3 moons, the great summer gathering would bring hundreds of pilgrims to the mountain. And a terrifying certainty had taken root in his mind that a sudden gale would blow through the valley, extinguishing the lights, draining the reserves, and leaving the entire assembly trapped in a catastrophic midnight panic. Driven by this paralyzing fear of a future shortage, Kazuki had turned his simple room into a cluttered storehouse of unnecessary provisions. He spent his daylight hours hoarding vast ceramic flagons of heavy rapeseed oil, stacking them so tightly against his walls that he could barely walk between them. Every evening, before the sun had even touched the western ridge, he would stand over the vessels with a pair of small iron shears, obsessively trimming the cotton fibers of the wicks over and over until they were raw and frayed. He would light the lanterns hours too early, building elaborate, clumsy paper windscreens around every single post, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gaps as he checked the oil levels 3, 4, 5 times before midnight. He believed that if he just anticipated every possible draft, if he stayed awake to monitor the fluid levels down to the last drop, he could guarantee the safety of the temple. Yet, the more he checked, the more his vision blurred with exhaustion, and the frantic clicking of his iron shears against the bronze frames filled his mind with a permanent buzzing anxiety. In the deep alcove of the main veranda sat Master Rado, the elderly lamp keeper, whose large hands were permanently stained a dark, glossy hue from decades of handling pure vegetable oils. Rado moved with an exceptionally slow, deliberate stride, his bare feet making no sound against the damp wooden floorboards as he watched the young monk exhaust his youth against the phantom darkness of next month. Tonight, the heavy mountain rain was falling in steady vertical sheets, drowning out the mountain birds and turning the garden paths into slow silver streams. The only other sound in the courtyard was the nervous, dry scraping of Kazuki's sandals as he scurried from pillar to pillar, adjusting screens that were already secure, his face hot with the friction of his own tracking. On the central stone platform of the garden, completely exposed to the dark sky, sat the monastery's greatest treasure, a flat, wider-rimmed bronze oil reservoir. Its metal had been darkened to a deep, solemn plum color by centuries of exposure to heat, rain, and light, and its broad rim featured 5 small, hand-polished wick grooves that had remained empty since the previous autumn festival. Kazuki, seeing the storm intensify, rushed toward the platform with a heavy roll of oiled silk, intending to bind the ancient vessel tightly to protect its empty grooves from the downpour. He was convinced that if the cold water collected inside the bronze rim, the metal would become contaminated, the wicks would rot, and the lamp would be rendered utterly useless when the winter arrived. Master Rado stepped off the veranda, his indigo robes absorbing the damp mist as he walked to the other side of the stone platform. He did not grab the silk wrap, nor did he tell the young man to return to his cell. Instead, the old keeper reached down with his bare, oil-darkened hand and gently laid his palm flat against the very bottom of the wide bronze vessel, feeling its immense cold density. He stood perfectly still in the downpour, his shoulders dropped low, his breathing moving in a deep, unobstructed rhythm that matched the steady fall of the rain. He did not look at the sky, he did not check the storage rooms. He looked down into the wide, empty, plum-colored rim, where a thin layer of rainwater was beginning to pool, and spoke with a low, unhurried resonance. "Kazuki, if the metal is already seasoned by centuries of fire, why do you treat the empty vessel as if it were a wound that must be bandaged before the night can begin?" Kazuki dropped the heavy silk wrap, the rain splashing cold against his wrists, as he looked across the stone platform at the old man's unmoving posture. A sudden wave of recognition rippled through the tight muscles of his throat. He looked closely at the wider-rimmed bronze lamp and realized something that his panic had completely hidden from his sight. The lamp was not failing because it was currently unlit and filled with rainwater. It was perfectly safe, precisely because it was cold, heavy, and empty of flame. The force Kazuki had spent trying to insulate it, to fill it prematurely, and to defend it from the weather was only adding a frantic, fragile heat to an object that was designed to endure the seasons by simply sitting still. In that quiet moment of emotional awakening, the tight band of constriction around Kazuki's neck began to soften. He saw that his months of obsessive hoarding and midnight checking had not been an act of service to the temple, but a desperate, fearful attempt to protect himself from the vulnerability of the unknown. He had been treating the natural darkness of the present hour as an enemy that had to be conquered through constant, hyper-vigilant strain, turning the simple care of the lights into a prison of permanent anticipation. But the deeper wisdom of the unlit bronze had not yet revealed its full depth, and as the downpour turned into a low, rhythmic murmur, the garden would show him a sanctuary that lives entirely beyond the reach of the match. This old story of the wider-rimmed bronze reservoir is not telling us to stop caring about the direction of our lives, nor is it asking us to become cold, empty shells indifferent to the challenges of tomorrow. It is showing us something much quieter, a path of deep emotional reconciliation that only opens when we see through the exhausting illusion that our anxiety is a form of protection. When we look at the daily landscape of our overthinking, we often discover that we are acting exactly like the young lamp keeper in the rain. We receive a promise of growth, or we find a brief pocket of stability, and our immediate, defensive habit is to run to our internal storehouses, packing our minds with endless regulations, trimming the wicks of our thoughts to a painful edge, and frantically bracing for an imagined shortage. We believe that if we just hold ourselves in a state of permanent mobilization, we can somehow buy insurance against the unpredictable nature of our lives. But the deep clarity of Buddhist wisdom shows us that the true heavy burden we carry is not the fact that the future is unwritten. The actual suffering is manufactured by the way the mind tries to squeeze tomorrow's requirements into the small, limited space of tonight, the simple uncertainty of what comes next, the natural fluidity of time. The changes that life brings without our permission is like the summer rain falling into the garden. It is an unavoidable reality, neutral and completely empty of malice. But when we refuse to let the lamp sit unlit, when we treat the dark spaces of our path as errors that must be instantly corrected by a frantic internal fire, we are adding a second wound to the first. We are burning our own vitality tonight to defend ourselves against a shadow that may never appear. In the language of the heart, letting go is never an act of careless abandonment. It is the absolute cessation of your unnecessary friction. It means having the profound emotional courage to allow the reservoir of your spirit to sit cold, quiet, and unlit when the season calls for darkness, trusting that you do not need to be on fire to be completely whole. The tight clenching we feel when we try to force an outcome is attachment, the desperate, exhausting voice that whispers, "I must lock every circumstance into a rigid design right now, or I will not survive the night." Craving is the chronic, underlying hunger that drives us to constantly overfill our containers, converting our healthy desire for safety into a crowded storehouse of hyper-vigilant thoughts that suffocate the soul. When we practice a soft, spacious awareness, we are not trying to paralyze our intellect or pretend that the future does not matter. Mindfulness is simply the capacity to notice the tight band of constriction wrapping around your throat without immediately picking up the iron shears to chop your thoughts into pieces. It is the realization that your anticipatory panic is not a factual diagnosis of an upcoming disaster, but merely a memory of old storms echoing through your nervous system. Impermanence, when understood through the heart, becomes a deep comfort rather than a threat. It reminds us that the dark valley, the heavy rain, and the quiet spaces between our achievements are all changing arrangements of form, events that will naturally clear in their own time if we stop trapping them within the heat of our own anxiety. Compassion, in this light, is the willingness to look at the inner saboteur not as a defect to be hated, but as a deeply exhausted guardian that has been keeping watch for far too long. It is the understanding that the part of you that refuses to rest tonight is merely a terrified child who has learned to confuse chronic worry with love, believing that if it stops pacing the perimeter of your life for even a single hour, everything you care about will disintegrate in the dark. When you allow your awareness to rest flat against the very bottom of your true nature, like Master Rado placing his palm on the heavy bronze base, you are granting that terrified guardian permission to step down. You are allowing the unlit wicks of your mind to rest in their grooves, realizing that the stillness of the night is not a danger to be avoided, but the very sanctuary where your spirit restores its capacity to see the light. Slowly, this understanding begins to move past the ancient stone walls of the story, settling directly into the cool, rain-dampened reality of the room where you are resting tonight. If it feels right, let your awareness drop down away from the world of explanations and find a quiet, unforced harbor within the direct physical sensations of this immediate evening. There is no need to flatten your posture into a rigid, artificial stillness, nor is there any expectation that your intellect must instantly cease its activity. Perhaps you can simply observe the natural, cool passage of the rain-scented air as it slips past the tight muscles of your throat, entering the lungs without any aggressive effort from your side, and then leaving the body with a slow, unhurried release. With every quiet exhalation, you might allow the broad, flat spaces across the tops of your collarbones to yield their remaining armor to the surface beneath you, permitting the heavy structure of your spine to sink fully into the mattress, letting the earth hold your physical reality without your constant supervision. Now, allow yourself to bring into focus just one specific, urgent thought that has been circling through your awareness today, perhaps an exhaustive plan for an upcoming transition, a fear that your current resources will run completely dry, or a quiet suspicion that you are unprepared for the changes ahead. There is no need to push this thought away, and you do not have to build a fortress to defend yourself against its presence. Even noticing its movement across your mind is enough. If it feels right, give a soft internal name to the emotional habit that accompanies this persistent vibration. You might say to yourself, "Here is the checking of the oil reservoirs," or "Here is the frantic trimming of the wicks." By naming the pattern, you are gently stepping back from the fire, choosing to observe the protective movement of your mind rather than exhausting your energy by running along its pathways. Imagine now that the center of your chest is like that wider-rimmed plum-colored bronze oil reservoir, sitting quietly on its granite slab in the center of a sheltered garden. Let the vessel of your heart be deep, heavy, and completely cool to the touch. In your mind's eye, see yourself placing that specific future emergency, that heavy bundle of anticipatory worry, directly into the spacious, empty bowl of the bronze. Let the imagined weight drop straight down through the throat, past the tight base of the neck, and settle into the clear, unmoving oil at the bottom of the vessel. You do not need to strike a match to illuminate this space. You do not need to trim the fibers of your thoughts with iron shears. There is no rule that demands you resolve next month's darkness within the span of this single breath. Watch what happens to the internal image when you allow the vessel to simply sit unlit in the rain, as the wide bronze reservoir remains cold and heavy under the open sky. The clear vegetable oil within it absorbs the dark shadows of the garden without generating any heat or friction. The raindrops strike the wide rim with a low, rhythmic murmur, but they do not disrupt the immense, steady density of the metal. The image begins to change. The frantic stockpiling of fuel ceases to feel like a life-or-death necessity, and the dark space within the vessel transforms from a threatening void into a quiet, cool sanctuary that knows exactly how to contain the night without catching fire. The tension that felt so sharp a few moments ago is losing its sharp grip, dissolving into the heavy, grounded equilibrium of the ancient stone platform. You can return to the active provisioning of your life whenever you are ready. But for now, you are fully permitted to let the wicks stay completely dry in their grooves. If your mind begins to scurry back toward the active labor of organizing your tomorrow, there is no need to judge yourself for wandering. Simply notice the movement. Let the cool, rain-dampened air pass through your throat like a quiet evening draft, and return your attention to the heavy, unmoving, plum-colored bronze. Nothing is being forced into immediate perfection tonight, and no emotional healing is being rushed before its time. But the deeper architecture of the garden has not yet revealed its ultimate secret, and as the downpour turns into a steady, rhythmic lullaby, we will discover that the darkest hours hold a peace that can only be found when we stop trying to outrun the night. 2 full seasons dissolved into the mountain earth after Kazuki first felt the constriction in his throat ease beneath the shadow of the plum-colored bronze reservoir. Yet the hidden engine of his anticipatory dread found a subtler, more stubborn path through his thoughts. The dry warmth of summer had given way to a sharp, biting autumn gale, a restless wind that rattled the thin bamboo screens of the monastery and carried the bitter scent of fallen walnuts and wet pine needles. The great gathering of pilgrims was now only a single day away, and the actual physical weight of the approaching event caused the defensive armor across his collarbones to lock with a freezing rigidity. Every hour, the internal voice returned with greater intensity, warning him that his previous insights were mere illusions, that he was entirely unprepared for the actual pressure of the festival night, and that a sudden, unseen shortage of materials would humiliate the lineage before the entire valley. Unable to endure the suffocating pressure in his chest, Kazuki left his cell in the dead of midnight, carrying a large wooden mallet and an extra bundle of raw, unspun cotton fibers. He climbed the slippery stone steps toward the highest terrace of the garden, where the wind was sharpest and the darkness felt most absolute there. Sitting quietly on a low granite bench, with his bare ankles exposed to the cold mist, was the old monastery gardener Seiji. Seiji was an elder whose skin was as deeply lined as the bark of an ancient plum tree, and who was known across the mountain for his peculiar habit of wandering through the midnight grounds, without ever carrying a lantern or a torch, moving entirely by the native familiarity of the stone paths. Kazuki rushed onto the terrace, his breath catching in his throat, his hands trembling as he began to unroll the raw cotton across the stone flags. He intended to force the thick fibers into every single wick groove of the great central reservoir immediately, even though the festival lights were not to be kindled until the following evening. He was convinced that if he did not pre-pack the channels tonight, if he did not ensure the fuel was already climbing the fiber before the crowd arrived, the sudden dampness of the mountain air would ruin the ignition and expose his fundamental incompetence. His movements were frantic, his iron tools clattering against the granite floor as he tried to outmaneuver the dark. Old Seiji did not rise from his bench, nor did he offer a sharp word of correction to the panicked young monk. Instead, he reached out with a long, unpolished wooden stirring rod and gently intercepted Kazuki's hands, pressing the stick flat against the unspun cotton to halt the frantic packing. Seiji then reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small dried walnut shell filled with simple well water, and poured a few drops directly onto the granite flags between them, letting the liquid spread into a silent, dark mirror that reflected the passing clouds. He leaned slightly forward, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to rest beneath the sighing of the wind. "Kazuki, look into the water on the stone. It does not carry a torch to see the sky, yet it knows exactly how to contain the moon when the clouds part. You are trying to light tomorrow's sanctuary with a match made of your own terror, but the wide bronze does not fear the unlit hour." The young monk froze on the wet stone, the raw cotton clutched tightly in his palms. A deeper, more spacious realization began to move through the tight muscles of his neck as he looked down at the dark reflection on the granite floor. His entire emotional challenge, the persistent habit of treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth that required immediate physical action, had been an exhausting attempt to conquer the uncertainty of time itself. He had been treating the quiet, unlit spaces of his life as emergencies that had to be eliminated through permanent mobilization, running himself ragged to solve problems that only existed within the architecture of his own projections. Transformation did not manifest as a sudden, magical erasure of his vulnerability, nor did Kazuki become a perfectly fearless master in the span of a single breath. His heart still carried a quiet thumping, and the cold autumn wind continued to whistle sharply through the bamboo screens. Instead, he experienced one small, profound shift in the way he related to his own suffering. He slowly opened his hands, let the bundle of raw cotton rest loosely on the bench beside the old gardener, and took a long, quiet breath before reacting to the next wave of panic. He chose to simply sit in the damp dark with the old man, allowing the uncertainty of the coming festival to exist without trying to fix it or organize it by force. He stopped treating the frantic calculations of his intellect as absolute reality, recognizing that the wide bronze reservoir was already standing true, completely whole, and perfectly capable of holding the night without needing his anxious fire to justify its presence on the mountain. Let this small, unforced turning in Kazuki's spirit settle softly into the immediate reality of your own body tonight. When we follow the trail of the raw cotton and the dark mirror of the water on the flags back to our own midnight rest, we begin to uncover the hidden gears of our internal panic. The exhaustion that locks your neck and shortens your breath before sleep is rarely created by the actual events on your calendar. It is generated by a secondary layer of defensive architecture within your own mind, an internal overseer that treats every unwritten hour of tomorrow as a crisis that must be frantically resolved before you are permitted to close your eyes. We spend our evenings rehearsing the future, treating the natural empty space of the night as a blank canvas, where we must draw every possible disaster just so we can build a wall against it. We look at our current stability, our quiet milestones, or our peaceful relationships, and instead of allowing the wide bronze reservoir to simply rest cold, we strike 100 mental matches, terrified that if we do not stay on fire, the dark will consume us. This habit of trying to fix the self through shame is the ultimate deception of the overthinking mind. We carry a secret conviction that if we judge our unlit spaces severely enough, if we treat our natural uncertainty as a personal failure, we can somehow force our lives into absolute safety. We look at our vulnerability or our fear of running out of fuel, and instead of letting it be a clean walnut shell filled with simple well water, reflecting the sky without any effort, we treat it as an emergency that must be hammered flat with our own intellect. We turn our temporary anticipation into a permanent identity, wrapping our sense of self so tightly around the friction of our survival strategies that we no longer know who we are when the oil is quiet. We search for reassurance in the dark, checking our internal meters and seeking approval from an invisible gallery of expectations, entirely blind to the reality that our own frantic stocking of the shelves is the very thing that clutters the sanctuary. This emotional struggle mirrors the profound Buddhist insight regarding the two distinct layers of pain we encounter on the human path. The first pain is what life brings, the natural, unpreventable autumn gale that rattles the bamboo screens of our existence. It is the arrival of a major transition, the unexpected demand on our energy, the physical boundary of a tired body, or the simple vulnerability of not knowing what next season will hold. These elements are like the dark clouds passing over the high terrace. They are neutral, fluid, and completely outside the boundaries of our control. We cannot command the seasons to stop turning, nor can we prevent the mountain air from feeling cold against our skin. This first layer of pain carries no personal judgment. It is merely the basic, unpreventable weather of being alive in a universe that moves. The second pain, however, is the exact friction the mind adds to the reservoir. It is the panic that flares up when we decide that the vessel should never be empty of flame. It is the fierce resistance that demands the cotton wicks remain perfectly dry and packed before the time is right. The frantic clicking of our iron tools against the stone, and the stubborn belief that if we only worry intensely enough, we can freeze time into a predictable pattern. We cannot always close the garden to block the first pain, but we can learn to stop feeding this secondary agitation. When you recognize that your overthinking is not a shield protecting you from a shortage, but a frantic spilling of the very oil you are trying to preserve, you can choose to open your hands. You can allow the fearful thoughts to look into the water without treating them as absolute diagnoses that require your immediate labor. True inner peace is never the rigid elimination of uncertainty. It is not a pristine, locked vault where no wind can ever blow and no shadow can ever fall. Peace is a completely different relationship with the darkness. It is the willingness to let the wide bronze reservoir sit absolutely cold and unlit in the middle of a storm, knowing that the inherent light of your true awareness remains entirely anchored at the base of the stone platform, completely unbothered by the absence of a visible flame. When we drop the exhausting labor of internal control, the structure of our nervous system can finally settle into its native equilibrium. The tight constriction wrapping around the front of your throat can begin to soften, as the spirit realizes it does not need to burn itself out to be secure. In a moment, this clarity will come closer to the small, specific habits of your daily hours. Let us carry this deep, unlit tranquility away from the wet mountain flags and place it gently into the precise, intricate corners of your modern daily life. This wisdom does not require a remote temple courtyard. To be true, it is designed to meet you in the immediate space where you are resting tonight, right where the quiet hiss of the garden rain matches the low hum of your evening room. Think of how many times over the past season you have found your fingers tightening around the raw cotton of your daily anxieties, waiting for a single text to arrive, checking the luminous pane of your phone for reassurance every few minutes, as if that digital light could dissolve the cold band of constriction around your neck. We lie awake during the late hours, replaying a perceived social error or a mistake made in the heat of noon, using our intellect like a sharp iron tool to pick at wounds that only require time and silence to heal. We look at the public achievements of our peers on a glowing screen and feel a sudden, hollow dropping behind the throat, a bitter whisper that tells us we are running out of time, that we are fundamentally behind in life, and that our own vessel is empty while everyone else is overflowing with abundant light. We find ourselves moving through crowded rooms, wearing a polite, practiced smile while a dense, suffocating pressure remains pinned directly against our collarbones, pretending to be completely unbothered because we fear that showing our unlit spaces would expose us as a failure. We want desperately to step off the treadmill of anticipation. Yet the moment we pull the weight of the dark over our chest, an internal critic demands that we justify our stillness, telling us we must earn the right to rest by solving the problems of next year before the morning arrives. But the peace you are looking for is never a trophy that waits for you at the end of a perfectly organized career. It is a quiet, radical discipline practiced in the very center of your most uncertain moments, a single slow breath before you answer. A demanding message is a form of supreme spiritual wisdom. It is the modern equivalent of old seiji, letting the walnut shell water sit still on the stone flags, allowing the reflection to clear without attempting to force the moon into a fixed position. We must learn to remember that not every defensive thought that crosses the brain deserves your obedience, and not every fearful feeling in the throat is a command to mobilize your life. The inner overseer will insist that you must keep checking the oil levels until your spirit is exhausted. But the deeper vertical alignment knows a much softer truth. You can care with the absolute fullness of your being about your work, your people, and your growth without gripping their strings so tightly that you drown the wick in your own friction. You can allow a changing relationship to have its own quiet, unlit phase during a difficult winter, without demanding that it catch fire immediately to soothe your fear of the dark. The wide bronze reservoir of your true presence does not need to be illuminated by a frantic intellectual success before you allow your posture to drop into the deep gravity of the bed. You are fully permitted to rest without earning it, because rest is not a reward given to a vessel that has finished its flame. It is the fundamental cool sanctuary that keeps the metal from cracking under the heat of the day. When you notice your attention scurrying back to the spreadsheets of your tomorrow, or the endless replays of your yesterday, remind yourself that the world is capable of holding its own balance for the next few hours without your constant supervision. You do not have to provide the light for the entire province tonight. By letting the unspun cotton of your thoughts rest loosely in their grooves, you are practicing a deep, wordless trust. You are allowing the native stability of the ground to do what your frantic adjustments could never achieve, letting the wide plum-colored bronze of your soul cool down completely into the dark, where the rain has no destination and the night requires no flame. The autumn gale has completely spent its sharp edges now, receding far into the deep stone valleys, leaving the high garden terrace standing in an absolute silent sanctuary against the vast midnight sky. Inside the sheltered courtyard, the air has settled into a cool, unmoving stillness, carrying the crisp, clean scent of rain-dampened soil and old plum trees. The frantic clicking of iron shears has gone entirely silent, and the heavy rolls of silk have been left undisturbed in the shadows, completely relieved of the anxious stalking of the daytime hours. Far below the rattling bamboo screens, protected on its central stone platform, the wider-rimmed bronze reservoir has ceased its internal friction, sitting perfectly cold, its deep plum-colored metal absorbing the midnight shadows without a single spark or flame. Let the internal pacing of your awareness match this gradual, unhurried cooling. Your physical frame is becoming remarkably heavy, sinking with a deep, fluid gravity straight down into the mattress, as if every muscle across your shoulders is finding its true, effortless alignment on the granite floor. The tight band of constriction that lingered around the front of your throat has dissolved entirely, leaving the skin soft, cool, and completely relaxed. The nerves at the base of your neck have dropped their constant armor, realizing that the structure beneath you is perfectly stable and requires none of your mental fire to remain secure. With each faint breath that passes through the body, you are returning home to the quiet, unlit center of your being. There is no longer any need to manage the provisioning of your thoughts tonight. The raw cotton has been left alone, and the hands that held the tools are now fully open, resting loose and empty by your sides, completely finished with the labor of anticipation. You have full permission to stop solving the spreadsheet of your life for tonight. The fears of running out of fuel, the suspicion of your own preparation, and the secret anxieties of the inner overseer are all safely surrendered to the gravity of the room, held secure by a vast, silent balance that operates entirely outside your supervision. The dark night is performing the alignment that your overthinking could never accomplish, gently calming the reservoir without a single match from your fingers. Let your breathing become smaller, slower, and more effortless, like the silent, microscopic gathering of moisture on a cool flagstone. You do not have to guarantee the success of next season's festival, and you do not have to prove the readiness of your spirit before you are permitted to close your eyes. The heavy, plum-colored bronze of your chest is already home, perfectly centered, deeply grounded, and completely safe from the metrics of the light. The keeper has stepped off the veranda, leaving only the vast, sheltered stillness of the unlit garden. As the absolute silence of midnight locks the mountain ridge in a state of perfect, unblinking equilibrium, the last top boundaries of the waking day dissolve into the dark, velvety expanse of the room. The bamboo screens are quiet, the cotton fibers are loose, and the clear oil is still. If the darkness itself is the very sanctuary that proves the depth of the vessel, why do you still hold the match? Perhaps the match can simply drop from the hand, falling soundlessly onto the damp earth below, its small unlit tip returning to the silence of elements that require no flame to be real. In the deep suspension of this midnight hour, the mind begins to understand that the darkness is not a vacuum waiting to be conquered by our frantic internal fire, but a wide, cool womb of potential where the spirit gathers its true, unforced vitality. We have spent so many seasons treating the empty spaces between our achievements as crises, running from one lit room to the next, terrified that if the spark should ever fade, our existence would dissolve into nothingness. But when you sit quietly by the wide bronze reservoir, you see that the dark is entirely full of its own native abundance, the gentle wetness of the soil, the steady alignment of the stone platform, and the silent, unblinking presence of an awareness that does not need a torch to recognize its own home. Let this quiet realization dissolve the final, microscopic remnants of tension within the roots of your tongue and behind the delicate bones of your ears. The internal overseer has spent the entire day tracking the horizon, insisting that your safety depends entirely on how much light you can engineer by your own strength. Yet the true teaching of the unlit wick is that the light has never been a commodity you could win or lose through chronic vigilance. It is an intrinsic, unshakable quality of your very being, a natural luminosity that remains perfectly whole, even when the reservoir sits cold and the bamboo screens are shrouded in shadow. When you stop trying to force tomorrow's clarity into existence, the energy that was bound up in your resistance returns directly to the center of your chest, cooling the oil, anchoring the base, and allowing the mind to discover a state of complete unforced equilibrium. Listen to the rhythmic low murmur of the rainwater as it slides off the cedar eaves, filling the slate troughs with a slow, effortless music that requires no conductor and carries no hidden agenda. The water does not hurry its transit through the garden, nor does it worry about whether it will find the river by morning. It simply yields to the absolute precision of the current moment, trusting the gravity of the valley to guide its path. Your life, too, possesses a native intelligence that knows exactly how to navigate the transitions of the coming season without needing your anxious calculations to map out every stone along the way. You can allow the future to remain unwritten, letting the unspun cotton fibers of your plans rest quietly in their grooves, fully supported by a universe that has never forgotten how to sustain your growth. Feel the profound absolute security of this total allowance, noticing how your physical frame has become completely unified with the heavy, unmoving density of the stone platform. You are no longer the frantic keeper scurrying from pillar to pillar. You are the wide, dark terrace itself, vast, open, and entirely untroubled by the changing weather of the sky. The digital tallies, the social metrics, and the relentless pressure to prove your readiness have all evaporated into the crisp evening mist, leaving only the pure, unrefined texture of a presence that is already enough. Just as it is, you do not need to perform a single act of discipline to earn this rest, and you do not need to justify your stillness to a single phantom critic before you let the world go dark. The entire monastery has fallen into a state of deep, dreamless sanctuary, wrapped in the cool, silent velvet of the midnight air. Far out on the highest ridge, the ancient plum trees drop their last remaining raindrops into the moss, their roots drinking deeply from the wet earth, preparing for the winter in absolute quiet trust. Inside the courtyard, the plum-colored bronze vessel rests in perfect, motionless symmetry, its clear oil reflecting the immense quiet space of the night, its 5 small wick grooves completely at peace in the shadow. Let your own mind slide effortlessly into this exact state of total, unresisting quiet, letting the last thread of your attention dissolve into the soft backdrop of the room. The breath is now nothing more than a faint rhythmic sigh, a tiny, warm current moving through a vast expanse of cool, dark peace. The day is fully resolved, the wicks are dry, the stone is still, and you are unconditionally permitted to sleep. Sink down into the absolute stillness of that dreamless, unbroken rest, allowing the final boundaries of identity to soften and fade like mist over a midnight stream. In the ultimate layers of Zen reflection, the mind comes to see that the frantic guardian who spent the day trying to protect your life was never a flaw to be cast out, but a deeply tired aspect of yourself that simply forgot the ground was already solid. We spend our lives fighting our own shadows, treating our fears as proof that we are fundamentally broken or unready for the path. But when you look upon your anxious calculations with a wide, soft compassion, You realize that the mind only sways because it wants so desperately to keep you safe. You can thank that internal watcher for its long seasons of service, and then gently remind it that the wide bronze reservoir is heavy enough to hold itself steady without a single ounce of human strain. This is the profound, quiet freedom of the middle way. You do not need to become a perfectly fearless master to experience the sanctuary of this night. You do not need to scrub the history from your thoughts or silence every echo of anticipation to be worthy of an absolute healing rest. The peace you have been searching for all day is not a pristine fire that must be kept alive. Through permanent vigilance, it is the silent, accommodating space that holds both your worries and your stillness, completely unbothered by the turbulence of the air. Like the plum-colored bronze vessel resting on its granite slab, your true nature knows how to contain the darkness without catching fire, how to endure the seasonal gale by simply sitting still, and how to trust the gravity of the earth to keep you anchored in the center of the storm. Let this understanding sink deep into the marrow of your bones, past the lingering memories of the marketplace, down into the quiet center of your chest where the breath has become as slow and effortless as the rising mist. The entire valley has fallen into a state of perfect, unblinking equilibrium. The bamboo screens have stopped their rattling. The iron tools have been laid down in the dark corners of the storehouse, and the unspun cotton fibers rest loosely in their grooves, carrying no heat, no tension, and no expectation. The world outside your room is carrying its own weight. The midnight rain is tending to the soil without your assistance, and the long line of your worries has been safely surrendered to the deep, dark well of the night. You do not have to hold up the rafters of your tomorrow by the strength of your own hands tonight. The day is fully resolved, its text written, its lessons integrated, and its materials laid to rest in the shadow of the courtyard. You are entirely finished with the labor of being yourself as the Latinite air breathes its last quiet sigh across the ancient plum trees. Let the image of the tower, the twine, and the stone vault fade entirely from your view, leaving only the dense, healing texture of a dreamless, unbroken quiet. The breath is now nothing more than a faint rhythmic whisper, a tiny warm current moving through a vast expanse of cool, dark peace. The night has opened its heavy gates to welcome you home, and as you slide effortlessly beneath the surface of the dark, you are held, you are safe, and you are unconditionally permitted to sleep. You are unconditionally permitted to sleep, allowing the heavy, dark current of this rest to take you completely past the shores of thought and into the deep stillness of an untroubled mind. In this silent sanctuary, the final understanding of the wide bronze vessel becomes completely clear. The peace you have been searching for all day is not something you must create, but something you discover when you finally stop trying to escape the dark. We spend our lives running from the unlit spaces, chasing the flickering shadows of approval and certainty, terrified that if we drop our matches, we will be left with nothing. But the ancient stone terrace knows a deeper truth. The darkness is not the absence of the light, it is the absolute rest of the light. The cool, quiet matrix where every flame is born, and where every flame must eventually return to find its renewal. When you allow your mind to go completely unlit tonight, you are not losing your way, you are returning to the native abundance of your own true center. The young monk Kazi spent seasons treating his own vulnerability as a dangerous flaw, believing that every tremor in his hands was a sign of structural failure. Yet the old gardener Seiji knew that the true center is never created by the tightness of the grip, it is revealed only when the hand opens and the raw cotton is permitted to rest quietly in its grooves. Your inner peace is not a performance that must be rehearsed or protected against the world. It is the fundamental stillness that is resting right here, beneath the stories, beneath the judgments, completely safe within the dark shelter of this room. Allow your physical frame to surrender its last remaining points of contact, feeling the deep, supportive weight of the mattress absorb the curve of your lower back, the heavy line of your shoulders, and the quiet space behind your knees. The air passing through your body has become beautifully thin, a soft, rhythmic current that moves like a gentle draft through the open joints of an ancient cedar hall, clearing away the lingering dust of the marketplace and leaving the mind completely transparent. You do not have to hold on to a single explanation to be worthy of this night, and you do not have to prove your competence to a single phantom judge before you let your eyes close. You are fully permitted to let the internal worker lay down its tools. The entire valley is now resting in a state of perfect, unblinking sanctuary as the midnight shadow deepens across the high mountain ridges. Far below the open rafters, inside the windowless lower vault, the drop-shaped bronze weight hangs in absolute, flawless equilibrium, its dark metal body completely cool, its long nettle twine entirely slack and silent in the dark. The weight does not analyze the winds of yesterday, nor does it prepare for the gales of tomorrow. It simply occupies the center of its own gravity, beautifully at rest above the smooth oilstone slab. Let your own awareness slide into this exact state of total, unresisting allowance, letting go of the separate identity that has spent the day trying to manage the universe, and allowing the final thread of your attention to dissolve into the velvety blackness of the night. As the lat night air breathes its last quiet sigh across the mountain, let the image of the tower, the twine, and the stone vault fade entirely from your view, leaving only the dense healing texture of a dreamless, unbroken quiet. The breath is now nothing more than a faint, rhythmic whisper, a tiny, warm current moving through a vast expanse of cool, dark peace. You are entirely finished with the labor of being yourself. The night has opened its heavy gates to welcome you home, and as you slide effortlessly beneath the surface of the dark, you are held, you are safe, and you are unconditionally permitted to sleep. You are unconditionally permitted to sleep, allowing the dark current of this rest to take you completely past the shores of thought and into the deep stillness of an untroubled mind. In this silent sanctuary, the final understanding of the wide bronze vessel becomes completely clear. The peace you have been searching for all day is not something you must create, but something you discover when you finally stop trying to escape the dark. We spend our lives running from the unlit spaces, chasing the flickering shadows of approval and certainty, terrified that if we drop our matches, we will be left with nothing. But the ancient stone terrace knows a deeper truth. The darkness is not the absence of the light, it is the absolute rest of the light, the cool, quiet matrix where every flame is born, and where every flame must eventually return to find its renewal. When you allow your mind to go completely unlit tonight, you are not losing your way. You are returning to the native abundance of your own true center. The young monk Kazuki spent seasons treating his own vulnerability as a dangerous flaw, believing that every tremor in his hands was a sign of structural failure. Yet the old gardener Seiji knew that the true center is never created by the tightness of the grip, it is revealed only when the hand opens and the raw cotton is permitted to rest quietly in its grooves. Your inner peace is not a performance that must be rehearsed or protected against the world. It is the fundamental stillness that is resting right here, beneath the stories, beneath the judgments, completely safe within the dark shelter of this room. Allow your physical frame to surrender its last remaining points of contact, feeling the deep, supportive weight of the mattress absorb the curve of your lower back, the heavy line of your shoulders, and the quiet space behind your knees. The air passing through your body has become beautifully thin, a soft, rhythmic current that moves like a gentle draft through the open joints of an ancient cedar hall, clearing away the lingering dust of the marketplace and leaving the mind completely transparent. You do not have to hold on to a single explanation to be worthy of this night, and you do not have to prove your competence to a single phantom judge before you let your eyes close. You are fully permitted to let the internal worker lay down its tools. The entire valley is now resting in a state of perfect, unblinking sanctuary as the midnight shadow deepens across the high mountain ridges. Far below the open eaves, inside the windowless inner garden, the wide plum-colored bronze reservoir rests in absolute, flawless equilibrium, its dark metal body completely cool, the raw cotton wicks entirely slack and silent in the dark. The vessel does not analyze the winds of yesterday, nor does it prepare for the gales of tomorrow. It simply occupies the center of its own gravity, beautifully at rest above the smooth stone flags. Let your own awareness slide into this exact state of total, unresisting allowance, letting go of the separate identity that has spent the day trying to manage the universe, and allowing the final thread of your attention to dissolve into the velvety blackness of the night. As the Latinite air breathes its last quiet sigh across the mountain, let the image of the garden terrace, the dry wicks, and the stone basin fade entirely from your view, leaving only the dense, healing texture of a dreamless, unbroken quiet. The breath is now nothing more than a faint, rhythmic whisper, a tiny, warm current moving through a vast expanse of cool, dark peace. You are entirely finished with the labor of being yourself. The night has opened its heavy gates to welcome you home, and as you slide effortlessly beneath the surface of the dark, you are held, you are safe, and you are unconditionally permitted to sleep. The autumn gale has completely spent its sharp edges now, receding far into the deep stone valleys, leaving the high garden terrace standing in an absolute, silent sanctuary against the vast midnight sky. Inside the sheltered courtyard, the air has settled into a cool, unmoving stillness, carrying the crisp, clean scent of rain-dampened soil and old plum trees. The frantic clicking of iron tools has gone entirely silent, and the heavy rolls of silk have been left undisturbed in the shadows, completely relieved of the anxious stalking of the daytime hours. Far below the rattling bamboo screens, protected on its central stone platform, the wider-rimmed bronze reservoir has ceased its internal friction, sitting perfectly cold, its deep, plum-colored metal absorbing the midnight shadows without a single spark or flame. Let the internal pacing of your awareness match this gradual, unhurried cooling. Your physical frame is becoming remarkably heavy, sinking with a deep, fluid gravity straight down into the mattress, as if every muscle across your shoulders is finding its true, effortless alignment on the granite floor. The tight band of constriction that lingered around the front of your throat has dissolved entirely, leaving the skin soft, cool, and completely relaxed. The nerves at the base of your neck have dropped their constant armor, realizing that the structure beneath you is perfectly stable and requires none of your mental fire to remain secure. With each faint breath that passes through the body, you are returning home to the quiet, unlit center of your being. There is no longer any need to manage the provisioning of your thoughts tonight. The raw cotton has been left alone, and the hands that held the tools are now fully open, resting loose and empty by your sides. Completely finished with the labor of anticipation, you have full permission to stop solving the spreadsheet of your life for tonight. The fears of running out of fuel, the suspicion of your own preparation, and the secret anxieties of the inner overseer are all safely surrendered to the gravity of the room, held secure by a vast, silent balance that operates entirely outside your supervision. The dark night is performing the alignment that your overthinking could never accomplish, gently calming the reservoir without a single match from your fingers. Let your breathing become smaller, slower, and more effortless, like the silent microscopic gathering of moisture on a cool flagstone. You do not have to guarantee the success of next season's festival, and you do not have to prove the readiness of your spirit before you are permitted to close your eyes. The heavy, plum-colored bronze of your chest is already home, perfectly centered, deeply grounded, and completely safe from the metrics of the light. The keeper has stepped off the veranda, leaving only the vast, sheltered stillness of the unlit garden. As the absolute silence of midnight locks the mountain ridge in a state of perfect, unblinking equilibrium, the last boundaries of the waking day dissolve into the dark, velvety expanse of the room. The bamboo screens are quiet, the cotton fibers are loose, and the clear oil is still, if the darkness itself is the very sanctuary that proves the depth of the vessel. Why do you still hold the match?